So Karen, you can go first with your presentation.
Thank you. Good morning, Assemblymember Rodriguez and the committee members. My name is Karen Wong. I'm the Assistant Director, Public Safety Communications with the Governor's Office of Emergency Services. For more than 40 years, Californians have been served by a capable 911 system. California's 911 system capabilities began rolling out in the early 1970s and were designed to serve the public based on a landline telephone system. I'll refer to the current system as Legacy 911 System. 40 years later, we have 451 public safety answering points, which I'll refer to as PSAPs, who answer over 26 million calls last year. Of those 26 million calls, 76% were made from a wireless telephone. California has 401 primary PSAPs and 50 secondary PSAPs. Primary PSAPs are operated by law enforcement, such as sheriff, police departments, or the California Highway Patrol. Secondary PSAPs are operated by fire and EMS services. This is a map of what 26 million 911 calls look like in California. As you can see, a lot of the areas are very dense in color, but it's kind of to show the enormity of our 911 calls that we have that take place every year in California. To help paint the picture where we are today with the Legacy 911 system, I'm going to take a few minutes and go over some 911 history. In 1972, Warren 911 Emergency Assistance Act required every county and city in California to implement an emergency telephone system. Implementation statewide had to occur by the end of 1985. In 1976, the State Emergency Telephone User Surcharge established a mechanism to fund the 911 system by imposing surcharge on intrastate telephone calls. As 911 was rolling out in the 70s, it became apparent that it was critical to know the location of the caller. As a result, E911 system was rolled out. E911 provided both caller location and telephone number identification for those calling from landline telephones. This rollout began in 1978 and was completed in 1993. Prior to the mid-2000s, when the availability and use of cellular telephones exploded, the Legacy 911 system provided a dependable service to the public. Today, the landline-based Legacy 911 system only provides service to approximately 24% of all 911 calls in California. So let's focus on the challenges of the 911 system today, which is based on cellular telephones, technology advances, and expectations of the public who rely on the use of smartphones every day. Applications used on smartphones today can find caller locations for transportation services, directions to local restaurants, etc. The challenges we face today include cellular technology does not abide by city, county, state law enforcement jurisdictions and fire jurisdictions or borders. You can see at the bottom down here we have calls that we actually are routed from Mexico up to California. When a wireless 911 call is made to a PSAP, the phone searches for the cell tower to process the call. Normally, the caller's signal will choose the nearest cell tower. If the nearest cell tower is busy, the 911 call will bounce to the next nearest tower, which may route the call to a PSAP outside the caller's responsible jurisdiction. Due to the cellular technology, there are multiple PSAPs whose service areas share the same cell sector. Only one PSAP can be identified as primary PSAP to initially receive all wireless calls for that cell sector. The primary PSAP identified to initially receive wireless 911 calls may not be the closest jurisdiction to respond to every call. Therefore, the 911 call must be transferred. Who is identified as the primary PSAP is determined by using historical call data and the CHP and the local PSAPs working together. Which jurisdiction it ends up to look at which jurisdiction has the majority of wireless 911 calls in that cell sector.
We have a question real quick on that.
on that specific point, that where it is routed is determined by looking at the historical calls, why then do most local PSAPs have no idea, no information from you on whether the larger volumes of calls for a specific cell tower is coming from or is destined for them or for another PSAP?
Okay. I'm not sure that they don't have this information. CHP does work with the local PSAPs, and there are several PSAPs that choose not to take their wireless calls when this discussion.
When local jurisdictions ask you for that information, you're not able to give them any information beyond 1,200 pages of PDFs with historical information. None of the technology that you have at your disposal that does actually statistical analysis of what percentage of calls. You just send them raw data, and you expect local jurisdictions to process 1,200 pages of raw data instead to determine whether those cell towers should be destined for them?
Okay. What we have in place is a system called, it's through Direct Technologies, it's called ECATS. Every 911 center, every one of our PSAPs have the ability to run the reports that will show the number of transfers in their jurisdiction and where those transfers went.
Then why have you provided inferior data in the case of Santa Barbara County, which has requested January to May calls and where they're destined for last year, and you can't provide the ECATS statistical analysis, which I'm told is comparable to the data that could be provided by the former program that you had, the RED project, or at least is similar or almost as good. So why don't you provide a simple percentage? This many calls were destined for you, this many calls were destined for CHP.
We can provide that data. Like I said, the PSAPs asked. The reference that you're giving to San Diego was considered a public records request, so we provided all the
Santa Barbara, Karen.
Pardon me?
To Santa Barbara.
What did I say?
San Diego.
Oh, sorry. Santa Barbara. We provided that as a records request, so we did not want to eliminate any of the data, so we gave all the data that we had, which turned out to be as large as what we just said. But the PSAPs themselves can go through and pull that data. We've also refined what we have through ECATS, that we can get better percentages now on our transfers, and we also have a flag mechanism that if the transfer goes over a certain number, which can be determined by the PSAPs and CHP, that they will be notified. So they'll be able to look at this data on a monthly basis and make good decisions every month on how those calls should be routed. And CHP is working very hard with the PSAPs to make sure these calls are routed where they can. A lot of our problems come from just the way the technology is if we have more than one PSAP in a cell sector.
So I have two questions. Just first, will clarify that what Santa Barbara County wants is to know the percentage of calls in that time period that were destined for them, city and county, and how many were destined for CHP. And I think that you could provide that information instead of waiting 2 months right before the hearing to give them 1,200 pages of PDFs, where PDFs you can't even integrate that data. If your data is possible to do statistical analysis of, I don't think you need to provide local PSAPs with data that's not possible to do a statistical analysis of without them retyping your information. The second is a question, is if we have the capability of doing that statistical analysis prospectively, based on historical data, thinking of what PSAP is most of the calls destined for a given tower, and we have done that for, my understanding is, what was 20% of the state its population now is about 13% of the state's population because of the growth of cell towers. Why don't we do it for the rest of the 87% of the state?
Okay, and I think what you're talking about, well, first I want to apologize. When we received the request from Santa Barbara, we were trying to make sure that we provided all the data that they wanted. If what they were really looking for was just transfers, we could have provided that sooner. We wanted to make sure that we provided what they asked for. So if we missed the mark on that, I absolutely apologize. On the other question that you have, I believe you're talking about the cell optimization project that has been discussed before. The 911 Advisory Board has been very involved in looking at better ways to provide location and where those calls should actually go to which PSAP. We have, for the last several months, have had a working group from the Advisory Board looking at the cell tower optimization as well as other technologies that could be used today. On April 7th, which was not in conjunction with this hearing, it was in conjunction with the APCO conference that we have going on where a lot of the telecommunication professionals are there. We made our vendor day for the 911 Advisory Board in conjunction with APCO, so we would have vendors be able to present to our 911 Advisory Board all the technologies that are there. The tower optimization was also presented at that meeting, and what they told us was is they could do about 8 cell sectors a month, and it would take 3 years to get through the state. So we were looking at, are there ways that we could do this quicker? And we did have some other technologies that are out there, one that I just mentioned, where we can actually start flagging the number of transfers, so the PSAPs and CHP can look at the data on a monthly basis, as well as some other technologies that our work group is going to be looking at and providing a recommendation to our 911 Advisory Board so we could make the best decisions using our experts, which is our Advisory Board and the work group, which they have our county coordinators, several PSAPs, industry leaders, and a couple of the board members working on this. So we're taking this very seriously.
So does that mean that you would be requesting something before the May revise to pay for that increased optimization?
It's hard for me to say now because we had some options that were minimal cost. So I will be waiting for a report back from the work group who has been pulling all the data together to give the Advisory Board, the 911 Advisory Board, some recommendations.
Sure would ask you to tell this working group that the May revise is a pretty hard deadline and that without that, the public safety of the state could wait another year. And particularly with delays to the next gen 911, I think it's imperative that we have a way of moving forward, and without a budget allocation, it's pretty hard to move forward.
And I have some additional points I'd like to make if I could finish.
Go ahead and
my
finish. Go ahead and finish. Okay.
Thank you. Okay. Let me go back to where I was at. Okay, through the cell sectors. In 2014, 18%, or 4.7 million of all 911 wireless calls were transferred from one primary PSAP to another primary PSAP, or a primary PSAP to a secondary PSAP. That explains how the 911 calls will get to a PSAP. However, knowing the location of the caller is critical to respond. Since wireless calls have no fixed address, the system that was put in place for the legacy 911 calls will not work. The FCC has regulatory responsibility for 911 wireless location accuracy. Based on rulemaking proceedings by the FCC, wireless calls will be delivered to a PSAP with either Phase 1 or Phase 2 location accuracy. Phase 1 location information provides the latitude and the longitude location of the cell tower. I've already explained how that does not provide the PSAP with the caller's location and even may route the call outside the responsible jurisdiction. Phase 2 location information provides the latitude and longitude of 911 callers within 50 meters. Bill, could you? This is just a simple chart to show how this difference really makes a difference when we respond, knowing that a tower could have a 5 or 10 mile radius around that. According to the FCC rule, ordered almost two decades ago, most mobile calls to 911 should include the caller's latitude and longitude coordinates. However, there was no enforcement to this order. Nearly 20 years later, we continue to struggle with location accuracy. However, based on the recent FCC order, January 29, 2015, the order requires that all wireless carriers must provide a dispatchable location or latitude and longitude location within 50 meters within the following time frames. Within 2 years, 40%, 3 years, 50%, 5 years, 70%, 6 years, 80%. We are concerned that those time frames are too long.